Hi, my name's Dave and welcome back to this series which is about learning the basics of music theory easily, step by step. In the last episode we looked at the chromatic scale, which was basically just learning the notes. In this lesson, episode number 2, we're going to look at learning the major scale and how we make the major scale and trying to understand the major scale. I'm going to go into as much depth as I can to help you understand the major scale and give you plenty of examples. So this could be quite a long episode, so feel free to pause, rewind, anything like that. I'd, like always, recommend to have a pen and paper with you so you can try and write things down as we go. There is a book that accompanies this lesson series, so check out the link in the description box below. Right, so you know the notes now, so we're going to use them notes to make the major scale. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to write down and work out the notes of the major scale in every key. Okay, the major scale. So it's likely that you've actually heard the major scale played before. It's sometimes referred to as the Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do scale. In popular music and Western music, it is definitely the most commonly used scale. The major scale, which is also known as the Ionian scale, is a diatonic scale. A diatonic scale consists of 7 notes before it starts over again on the same starting note, which is an octave higher. In the last episode we went through the chromatic scale. Now the chromatic scale, we said the notes move in semitones or half tones. If we have 2 half tones together, that makes a whole tone, which is also just called a tone. If you're on the guitar, a half step or a semitone would be just 1 fret to the next fret. If we have 2 of those, which will be 2 frets apart, that's your tone. The major scale consists of moving up in half steps and whole steps, which are going to form a pattern that we base our entire major scale on. So this is going to be our formula for making the major scale in any key. So if you were to start on A, apply this pattern, then you're going to get all the notes of the A major scale. If you start from B and use this pattern from B, you're going to get the B major scale. Do it from C, C major scale. No matter where you start from, the formula stays the same. So the formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now it might seem quite tricky to remember at first, but I always just remembered it as the 3rd and the 7th are always halves, everything else is a whole. So whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So now we know the formula and we know the chromatic scale, and we know the chromatic scale moves up in half steps. So every note that's next to each other is going to be a half step. If we go 2 half steps, we get a whole step. Now let's use our formula and apply it to this chromatic scale to find some major scales. So let's see this formula in action. We're going to use the key of C first of all. On your piece of paper, I just want you to write C. Using the chromatic scale, if you've got it wrote down, start from C and you now want to find a whole tone to get to the next letter that we need. So on C, if we go up a half, we've got C sharp, and then another half would lead you to D. 2 halves make a whole, so now you can write down the letter D. We've found our next letter of the scale. So we've done the first one, so now after D we need another whole tone. So we've got D, we need to find a whole tone from D. So D, a half from D would be D sharp, another half from that would be E, so 2 halves make a whole, so now you can write down the letter E. So now you've got the scale as C, D, E. I hope this is all making sense so far. So after E, we now need to find our first half step. So if you're looking at your chromatic scale, a half step from E goes straight to F because we don't have any sharps after E. We don't have a sharp or a flat between the notes E and F. So now you've found your next note, which is F. So we now have wrote down the notes C, D, E and F. And that's the start of our C major scale. So let's carry on. So now we've got an F, we now need to go and find a whole tone. So F, whole tone from F, we can see on the chromatic scale a half tone will be F sharp, but we need a whole tone, so we need to go up another half tone, so we've got a G. So that means that the notes F to G are a whole step. So write down the letter G. We've now got C, D, E, F, G. Next we need another whole tone. So G, we need a whole tone from G, so the next note would be G sharp. That's a half step though, isn't it? So we need a whole step, so we need another half step. G sharp, now we're going back to the beginning of our chromatic scale. A, there we go. You found the 6th one, so that's A. So C, D, E, F, G, A. Next, we need to find another whole step. So we're on A, whole step from A. So A, a half step from A would be an A sharp. A whole step, so that's 2 half steps together, leads us to a B. There you go, write down B. I don't think this is as hard as it seems, is it? So all we're doing now is applying the formula to the chromatic scale and we're getting the C major scale. Now we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B. We just need the last one. So we've done whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. We need the half. So we're on B. A half step from B, if you're looking at your chromatic scale, is actually C. Because remember we said before, B to C doesn't have a sharp, so we're going straight from B to C. Now, you should have on your piece of paper your first scale. This is your first major scale. It's just the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And that is the C major scale. Okay, so you now have the C major scale. Now, you've probably noticed the C major scale doesn't have any sharps or flats. This means we could refer to this as being a perfect scale, and it's really straightforward because there's no sharps or flats to confuse us. This is why a lot of examples in music are done in the key of C, so there's no sharps or flats to contend with. This is why I use the C major scale or the key of C to use for my examples in a lot of different situations. But we do need to address sharps and flats. So we're going to do some more examples in just a moment where we're going to use some sharp keys and then we'll go on to flats afterwards, so we're doing it step by step. There is something we have to go through before we start looking at sharp keys or flat keys, and that is a major scale can only use each letter type once. So what I mean by that is, if we start on A, a major scale starting from A has to go in the order of the letters A, B, C, D, E, F and G, and then we put sharps in to change the letters so it matches the formula that we've got. In the same way that if we started on D, we'd go up D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. And then we put sharps in so that matches the formula. So you notice that all the letters are only used once. A is only used once, B is only used once, C is only used once. Everything has to be used once. You can't, let's use the key of G as an example so I can hopefully give you some context to this. So if you're on the key of G, you would start with G, then you have to have the letters G, A, B, C, D, E, F and G. And then we have to change the notes so they match the formula. So the notes of G actually are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then G. If for some reason we wrote it down as G, A, B, C, D, E, and instead of having F sharp we use G flat, and then back to G, we've used G more than once. We've used it for a G flat and for the letter G. This means that it gets confusing in a music theory setting, and whether you read music or not, or whether you want to read music or not, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Just because a person might not know how to read or write doesn't mean the words are spelled any differently. It just means you don't know how to spell them. If you had the letter G and the letter G flat in the same scale, that means that on a music stave, the line that has the letter G on it is going to be getting used for the notes G flat and G, which is going to be quite confusing to read and write, especially when the line that should have an F note on it isn't being used at all. So now we've got the G line that's being used too much and the F line that's not being used at all. Now the key of G only has one sharp in it. If we went on to say the key of E, where we've got quite a few sharps, that means there's going to be some or a couple of lines that are covered in notes and it looks really weird and you couldn't read it properly. It'd just be too confusing. But then you've got quite a few lines that aren't being used at all. Now I know that is a bit confusing, but that is the reason why we have sharp keys and flat keys. That's the reason why we have some keys that will contain flat notes, some keys that contain sharp notes. You can only use each letter type once to make up the major scale. We're going to go through the G major scale now. So we're going to go through this step by step, applying the formula. So the first place to start when working out keys is I want you to write down the notes in letter order, and that's going to make it easier. So from G, you start from G and write up to G. So we write on a piece of paper G, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then back to G. And we're now going to apply the formula that we've got from left to right to work out what notes we have in the G major scale. So remember the formula, it's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if you've got your chromatic scale in front of you on a sheet of paper, we're starting from G and we're going to work our way around applying the formula until we get back to G. So we're starting from G, the left hand side, we've got a G note there and we need to find a whole step to get to our next letter. So a whole step away from G is A. So on your piece of paper, you've already wrote down G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So now G to A is correct. So we don't need to add any sharps there or anything. G to A, correct. Leave it alone. Right. Now we need from A, we need to find another whole step now. So a whole step from A, looking at chromatic scale, A whole step is to B. So we've got wrote down already G, A, B. So that's correct, isn't it? So we don't need to add any sharps or anything there. So G, A, B is right. Now we're on B and we need to find a half step. So we've got whole, whole, half. So a half step from B goes straight to C. So on your piece of paper, you've actually got it already wrote down, haven't you? G, A, B, C. So that's correct. Everything's right so far. So now from C, we need to go back to whole step. So C, a whole step from C is a D. And we've got that wrote down already. G, A, B, C, D. Everything's correct so far. It's all working out really well. So now we're on D. We're still on whole step. So D, so we've done whole, whole, half, whole. We're on the next whole step. So D, a whole step from D is an E. And that's also wrote down. So we've got G, A, B, C, D, E. Now, E to F, we need a whole step from E now. So E to F, is that a whole step? No, it's not. You can see it on your chromatic scale. An E to an F is a half step. So that means that we have to push our F forward. Remember what I said before in the first video? If a note has to move forwards, we have to sharpen it. If we have to move it backwards, we have to flatten it. So the F needs to be moved forward. So now we add a sharp above the F. And now E to F is the whole step that we're after. I hope that makes sense. So now we've done whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. We need to find the last one now, which is a half step. And the letters, just to recap, we should have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. And now the last letter you've got wrote down, because we already wrote them down, is G, which is back to the beginning. So is F sharp, the last one we found, to G, is that the half step that we need? And I think you'll find it is. So F sharp to G is a half step, which means now we followed the formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And we wrote down the letters first, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And we found following the formula that everything worked apart from that one letter. And all we needed to do with the F was push it forwards. Pushing it forwards makes it sharper, so we made it into an F sharp. And now you have the G major scale. We're going to do one more example now of a sharp key, and we're going to look at the key of D major, and we're going to try and do this one a bit quicker, and it's just so you can see the concept in action again to make sure you understand it fully. So start off by writing the notes D through to D. Can't repeat any letters more than once, so it's got to go D, E, F, G, A, B, C, back to D. So I have that wrote down on a piece of paper, and now we're going to go from left to right, applying our formula to see if anything will need to change. So D to E, we need a whole step. So D to E, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. So D to E, keep those the same. We're on E now. Now we need another whole step. So E to F. Now E to F, is that a whole step? Exactly, it's not. It's a half step, isn't it? So what we need to do now is we need to again take that F and we need to sharpen it. So we need to move it forwards so the gap from E to F is no longer a half step, it becomes a whole step. So add a sharp after that F note, and now you've got the notes D, E, F sharp. The next note you've got wrote down is a G, and using our formula, we've done whole, whole, we need to now find a half step. So we're on F sharp, because we've just changed F to F sharp. Is F sharp to G a whole step or a half step? Correct, it's a half step, so that's right, it follows the formula. So now we've got D, E, F sharp, G, and that follows whole, whole, half, and now we're back on to finding another whole step. So you're on G, and we now need to find a whole step, because we've done whole, whole, half, and we're back to whole step. So whole step from G is an A, and we've already got A next, so that's correct, we don't need to change anything. So now you've got D, E, F sharp, G, A. A to B, so we need another whole step. Is A to B a whole step? Yes, it is. So that's correct. We don't need to change anything. Right, so we're on B. So now we need to find, so we've done whole, whole, half, whole, whole. We need another whole step, don't we? So we're on B, and the note we've got wrote down is a C. So we need that to be a whole step. So is B to C a whole step or a half step? So you can see in a chromatic chart, a chromatic scale chart that you've got wrote down, that B to C is actually a half step. So again, what we need to do now to fix that gap, to get rid of the problem there, is we need to make the C a C sharp. We need to move it forwards. So now we've got D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. And now we've got our last one to find. We've done whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. We just need that final half step now. So C sharp we're on. We need a half step from C sharp, which as you can see on your chromatic scale is to the D. That brings us back to the beginning. We have our full D major scale, note for note, all correct. So that's all the examples I'm going to give you for sharps. There are more sharp keys, but that's absolutely fine. I'm going to give you the order in which I think it's best to work out at the end. But there you go, you've got the notes for the key of C major, the notes for G major, and the notes for D major. And we're going to go on to looking at a flat key in a second, so you can see how that works. Onto a flat key. Now, as you might be able to guess, a sharp key, a note had to be changed in each scale to make the formula work, and it meant the notes had to be pushed forwards, which is why they became sharps. So that should hopefully kind of spark in you to realise that that means that notes need to be pulled backwards now to make them fit the formula, and that's why we have sharp keys and flat keys. So we're going to go through the key of F now so you can see how this works and so you can see how it all comes together. Okay, so we're going to start out by writing the notes F through to F. As we stated before, we can't have any letter type more than one, so that means that the scale has to go in order of F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. It has to do that. So start by writing that down, and then we're going to work from left to right, and we're going to see if our formula fits what notes we have. And if it doesn't, we're going to fix whatever areas come up. Any problems that come up, we're going to fix by using our formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So F to G, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. So that's all fine. So F to G is a whole step. G to A is a whole step. Sorted. Perfect. Now we've done whole, whole. We're now on half step. So is A to B a half step? Now, as you can see, if you're looking at chromatic scale, it's not. It's a whole step. So that means that we have to fix that problem. Now, if you were to move the A and make it sharp, then that actually means the note from the gap from G to A is now 3 half steps, which is a tone and a half. That can't be right. It don't fit the formula. So the only option we have to fix this problem is we have to move the B backwards, which is why we're moving the note to a flat, because we have to move it back. So that's why we now have F, G, A, B flat, because we've followed our formula. Whole, whole, half. F, G, A, B flat. Next, we're back onto whole tones. So we're on B flat, so we've just changed the B. Is B flat to C a whole step? Yes, it is. That's absolutely right. If the B had stayed at B, then actually that would have been wrong. We were looking for a whole step, but that's a half step. So we've actually fixed it on both sides. So changing that B to B flat has fixed the problem from A to B, and it's also fixed what would have been a problem going from B to C. So that's the only option. We could only change the B to B flat. That's the only option we had. So now we're on C. C to D, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. D to E, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. E to F, which is our final one, the half step, is that a half step? Yes, it is. So now you've got the F major scale, which is F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. There you go. So there you have it. There is an example of finding out the notes of a flat key, and we've done some sharp keys. Now, it's best now for you to go away and to figure out all the keys. So you start by putting whatever key you're working on and going through the alphabet. So if you were working out the key of E, you'd start from E and go to E. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. You write all those down, and then you work from left to right, applying the formula, and you should be getting used to the formula now of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. and you fix any problems that you have or that you come across so that the notes either become sharp or flat, and then they will fit the formula. And if you do it correct, any notes that you change will all be either sharps or they will all be either flats. And hopefully this is starting to shed some light on why we have sharp notes and flat notes, and we have what we call sharp keys and flat keys. I recommend that you work out these keys, all the keys, in a particular order. So the order I'm going to suggest to do them is start by doing C first, then G, then D, then A, then E, then B. After that, I want you to do F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and G flat. There is a reason why I've given you that order, and it's going to come apparent in some of the coming lessons. But when you work them out in that order, I want you to see if there's any patterns that you can see forming. So that's everything I want to go through in today's lesson. Thanks very much for watching the video. I know it's been very long, but that's because this has been jam-packed with loads of valuable information. And I know it was quite a long way of going around working out the scales, but that's because to understand how the keys work, at first it's good to be able to work them out. But next we're going to go over a concept of how to be able to do this really quickly and really easily by starting to look at what we call the circle of fifths, and it's going to provide you with the answers to what notes are within a key without having to go through the formula and without having to work out everything in this long fashion that we've done in this lesson. But to understand the circle of fifths, it's good to understand how the major scale works first. So the next lesson we're going to start looking at the circle of fifths. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want the book that accompanies this series, just check out the link in the description box below, and I will see you in episode number 3.